to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Told you guys I was going to have a late upload as I was on Jets 24/7 channel. Anybody that came over there, I appreciate it. But the New York Giants, of course, had a late practice today. It actually started at 5:30. I think it concluded around 7 or 7:30 as they had their second practice with pads on, their fourth practice overall. And by all accounts and what everything had to say, it was by far the most physical practice to date. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get into the exact quotes. Art Stapleton, who of course writes for the New York Giants, went on to write that it was the most physical practice he's seen in a training camp in recent memory. And the players that stood out, well, it was mainly the offensive line. There was a near injury scare, which we'll get into as well, but it seems like everybody remains unscathed from an injury standpoint. As a matter of fact, Corey Ballantyne got back to it before the conclusion of practice, but there was a bit of an injury scare as it got started. But it seems to be more and more encouraging things. They showed some highlights. Daniel Jones looked like he had a really nice back shoulder fade to Golden Tate in the right corner of the end zone from everything that I was able to gather. The offensive line is what stood out. If you go on the Giants website, they went on to say that Will Hernandez had a really strong practice, a guy that I'm really looking forward to this year. I had high expectations for him last year. They're just as high this year. He was a little bit underwhelming last year. I expect him to have a big step up. Xavier Mckinney, we finally hear something about him. He was able to come up with an interception today that they said would have been a pick six, and they said that Evan Ingram, according to Freddie Kitchens, the tight ends coach, is really having a strong training camp and that he's starting to get back from that injury, and he's been really impressed with his work ethic. But I wanted to jump into all the quotes and exactly what they did. I thought it was interesting, some of the drills that Joe Judge had them doing. It was a lot of one-on-ones, and it was very physical. But let's jump into all of it. First thing we're going to talk about is this. Practice was highlighted by the kind of hitting drill seldom seen in recent training camps. It was a one-on-one hitting exercise in which both the contact and the players' and coaches' reactions were loud. Two groups worked simultaneously. A ball was placed on a large pad underneath a crouching offensive ball handler, such as a running back. At the other end of the pad stood a defender. When the whistle blew, the offensive player picked up the ball, took a couple of steps, and lowered his body into the defensive opponent, whose job it was to bring him to the ground. Everyone hit the grass, with each side claiming its share in victories. So it seems like the New York Giants definitely brought the physicality today, which is what you expect. Judge later went on to talk about it, but he talked about this in his introductory press conference that the New York Giants were going to be a very physical team in their practices. He was going to have them working hard, and that's exactly what he did. The other thing that I wanted to briefly touch on was the Giants' decision to do this later in the day. Obviously, traditionally, the Giants would have practiced earlier. The reason Judge decided to do it later was because he wanted them to be at full strength, being that they had practiced 3 days in a row, and it makes sense. Especially in this offseason when you only have 12 padded practices to try to get the most out of each individual one. And that has been what we've heard. It's been incredibly efficient, and it seems like the New York Giants are doing everything they can to learn this as quickly and as well as possible. Next thing I wanted to touch on. Normally there's a shock factor when the fans watch that at first. This is Joe Judge talking about the hitting. The media sees it at first with, oh, they're hitting? Coach Joe Judge said, I'm just putting into context what we're trying to do on every play. We're staying on our feet for most of the practice with the exception of a couple of live tackling drills. You have to selectively do those through training camp to get the guys ready. Again, we're not doing anything out there to try to see who's the toughest guy in the schoolyard. We're trying to get every player ready to play safely for 60 minutes against a competitor for 16 weeks. And he's right. I mean, you can only do so much training on a track, working out, on a field. You don't really get a full taste of it until you really put the pads on and you start hitting. And that's what they really, jumped into today, specifically on both sides of the ball. Art Stapleton went on to say this: Giants got a scare during the most physical drill I've seen at camp since I've been on the beat with cornerback Corey Ballantyne when he went down clutching his shoulder after attempting to tackle wide receiver Austin Mack in live goal line session. Stunningly, Ballantyne returned to practice later. And Ballantyne's a guy that's trying to win a spot, and he's showing you his toughness there. He went down, hurt his shoulder, came back in, and he continued to compete for the New York Giants as we continue to hear good things about him. Next thing I want to touch on was this. Joe Judge's reasoning for the one-on-one goal line drill. If we think the Pittsburgh Steelers are coming here to hug us, we're sadly mistaken. We have to train these guys to be physical. And he's absolutely right. The Pittsburgh Steelers in particular are a very physical football team. They have one of the best defenses in the game, and the Giants' offensive line hopefully will be ready for the task. You're talking about two of the best pass rushers in the game with Watt and Dupree. It's a team that's known for their physicality as well as on the offensive side of the ball. They have a very strong, good offensive line. So Judge is talking about here, he said, we're not going to baby these guys. We're going to get these guys ready to go. And then the next thing, I think that was it actually. Yeah. Not too much. Like I said, some of the standouts from what I read, Evan Ingram, Will Hernandez, which is very encouraging, and Xavier McKinney as he gets his first interception. The biggest thing from all this, no injuries. And that's what you want to hear when you're doing training camp, especially when you're getting into the physical portion of it with the pads. But it seems like Joe Judge definitely wants to train his team to be a physical football team, a fundamental football team, and a team that comes out and is prepared each and every week. And I'll tell you one thing as New York Giants fans, maybe not so much this year, but as this team continues to grow and these players develop, this is not going to be a team that gets pushed around. And I think that's what Joe Judge wants. He wants a tough football team that's going to win games in the trenches. And that's what Dave Gettleman's been trying to build here for the last 3 years since he's gotten here. All you've heard him talk about is hog mollies. He's brought in big, imposing forces on the defensive line. He's drafted you a left tackle. He's drafted you a left guard. And the New York Giants want to be the toughest team when they get on a football field. I still think they're not quite there yet, but they're definitely headed in the right direction. And Joe Judge and Dave Gettleman have an old school mentality. And tonight, you saw the hog mollies come out, and I can't wait. I cannot wait for the football season and to see how much this offensive line has progressed. Mark Colombo also talked about Will Hernandez and the offensive line in general and said very encouraging things as well. I'll definitely have a video up tomorrow talking about training camp when I get an opportunity, when we start to hear some of the highlights. But basically, from what I gathered today, the thing that stood out more so than anything else was the physicality on both sides of the ball and the type of practice that Joe Judge ran. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.